Tuesday night, the dance party, but the opening mixer is also a lot of fun, and that's on Sunday. And actually, Jessica, for first time attendees, we have a special reception on Sunday at noon. So, there you go.
Fantastic. I'm really excited.
That's where you'll get all the tips and the tricks. Hey, Nora, how are you? Sorry for all that.
Thank you. I finally made it.
Hey, yeah, I was telling Jessica, I said, I shouldn't have sent the because I sent you a meeting to put it on both of our calendars, right? So we block the time off, but then I forget that automatically makes it a Teams meeting. And so which confuses things. So I apologize. Anyway, thank you for being here.
It's fine. If I go a day without the technological glitch, I get worried.
Yes. Well, semper gumby, we always have to be flexible, especially with technology. And anyway, welcome, Nora. We usually this goes until 4, I guess. But if you need more time, that's not a problem. If it's not a problem for you, and if it's okay, we are recording it. And hopefully you're okay with us posting it to our YouTube channel. If not, just let me know and we'll proceed accordingly. And we're pretty informal, so I usually let people introduce themselves. I should also say that this is a webinar format, I think, which means if people have questions, they could put it into the Q&A or in the chat. Either one, and we'll ask Nora. And how did you want to do that? Are you okay with questions as you go, or do you want to wait until the end?
The code I wrote is not very long. It's more of just an introduction to how the Census API package works and how to use it. So I'm happy to answer questions as they come up. I'll keep the chat open on my screen, so I'll be able to see if people have questions to ask. And then I can do, if anyone wants to vocalize their questions, I can do that at the end.
Great. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And Jessica, did you want to say anything before we pass it to Nora?
I'm really excited to see this presentation. So I have gotten to see Nora in action a few times. She's one of our wonderful trainers at our for our Census R bootcamp. She has given presentations and she's helped other people through the R user group. So every time I see this, I'm always wowed. Now, Nora does some of the coolest things with R I've seen, especially her use of deliverables and API to test for seasonality with QFR data, all sorts of really neat things. So again, I am excited. I hope everyone has something cool that they can take from this and use our Census API. And Nora, I'll hand it off to you to work your Census magic.
Great. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. If I can figure out how to do that here. Let's see.
I think it's the big green thingy. Hopefully you have the ability.
All right, I might have to hop back and forth. It's just a little bit different from the standard Zoom. Let me see if that worked.
I can see your screen.
All right, so are you seeing my R screen?
Or your R screen, yeah.
Okay. Great, excellent. Okay,
yep.
So just
wait, can you make it, I'm sorry, can you make it a little bigger? Or maybe I can stretch it here.
You mean like the font size is too small?
Yeah, yes. Just because I'm partly, hard. It's hard for me to see.
Let me see if I can fix that. How's that? Better?
Better, yes, thank you.
All right. By the way, and for those of you watching, I have clearly changed a lot about the appearance of my R Studio, and all of the changes I made are here in the Tools tab, Global Options, and Appearance is how you can change the rainbow colors of your fonts and the typeface that you use. I like the old typewriter font. Not everybody likes that. You do what you like, but there's a lot of different themes to pick from, sizing of things, and then pane layout is where you can move things around. I like writing on the right and having kind of the machine work on the left, but everyone's a little bit different. So just in case you're wondering why it looks funny, it's because I prefer it that way. But there's a lot of different things you can move around, and that's where you would do that. And just a little pro tip. Before I get started, a little bit about me. My name is Nora. I work in the Economic Indicators Division at the Census Bureau on the Quarterly Services Survey. I've been working here for about 2.5 years. And prior to that, I was working as a college professor at a community college in California, which is where I'm from, and teaching math and statistics to students who don't want to learn statistics. So it was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed convincing people that they're smart, which is what you end up doing when you're teaching a stats class. I got my master's degree from Cal State East Bay, which used to be called Cal State Hayward, in statistics, and my bachelor's degree from Humboldt State University, which is now called Cal Poly Humboldt, in pure mathematics, and have been teaching, tutoring ever since until I started this job. So this is my opportunity in this job to do a lot and work a lot with R, which I've been working with since I was in graduate school about 15 years ago. It's been a while. I've been working with R for a long, long time. It is my favorite statistical programming language. It's actually my favorite language for a lot of other things as well, now that it's built out. So I've built Shiny apps before, which I really like, and I think that it's a really powerful tool to use within R. But today we're going to talk about the Census API package. There's also another API package for the Census API, which is called Tidy Census, which is really useful, but it is incomplete. It doesn't cover a lot of the surveys that we conduct and doesn't really it's a subset of the available API data. Unfortunately, it doesn't include my economic indicator that I work on. So of course, not good enough for me. So I went and investigated the Census API package, which is not as user-friendly and clean and sharp as the Tidy Census package, but does include, as far as I can tell, all of the indicators available on the Census API. So it's more complete, but a bit messier. So let me go through with you this program that I wrote. So this is using our Markdown. I prefer to write it like a script and then run it. So a little bit about this up top. There's a web page with our user guide, the Census API user guide, available on the census.gov website. So I put the URL to access that here. The actual user guide itself is a PDF, which I put the URL for here. One of the most difficult things I found when you're looking for data through the Census API is figuring out what codes they want you to enter, because it's not as simple as saying, give me all the data for California. I need to know what special code to use to signify that I want data from California. So I put some information here. They're called FIPS codes that the census uses. There's other government agencies that also use these codes, but they are used for the API to show you. I hope this works. I don't know if I can lay this over. Can you see this web page over the R page, or is it not?
Yes, it took a little while to get over there, but yes.
All right, so this is the list of state FIPS codes. For example, there's also county codes, and there's congressional district codes, things like that. But I just wanted to give everybody sort of a glimpse into what they look like. So if I wanted to get information just for California, I have to enter the code 06 in the API call through the Census API package to get information for California. So just to indicate, like, it is a little rough around the edges, the Census API package, because it's not all nicely fit for us. So we can just type in the word California and it knows what code that is. So something to think about when you're using this package. But I did put, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Nora. So I've had, let's see, a task that I've been working on lately where I've had to switch between state abbreviations, full state names, FIPS codes, like the 2-digit state code plus the county codes. And there is a package, there's a couple packages, but I think the one I'm thinking of is something like CDL tools or something like that. But with such a package that would allows you to convert, say, easily between, like if you had the state abbreviation to get the FIPS, would
Mhm.
that help with the Census API?
The Census API does use the FIPS code. So if you have a secondary package that'll help you identify what code you need for the project you're working on, then it would absolutely come in handy. I didn't realize that. I had just been referencing what's available on the census.gov website as far as that kind of information. But that's great.
Yeah, I finally,
To
this
have
happened.
that.
Yeah, it was very recently. I finally got tired of trying to do it myself, and then, realizing that, okay, this sounds dumb, but the alphabetical order of the full state name is not the same as the alphabetical order of the 2 digits abbreviation anyway. And
That would make way too much sense.
yeah, exactly. And that the state code, the 2-digit state codes aren't, I mean, there's holes in them. So
Yeah.
they're not really consecutive. Anyway,
Yeah.
and so I kind of just Googled, searched for the package, and there's 2 of them. And while you're giving your talk, I will figure out what it is and I'll put it in the chat.
Great, thank you, because I would like to investigate that myself. That would definitely come in handy. We will need the FIPS codes if we're trying to use the Census API package to get data specific to a geographic location or area. For the sake of simplification, I didn't include any indicators that are that geographically determined. I'm just sticking with the indicator I work on, which is the quarterly services survey, which is nationwide. So we don't have data specifically separated by state. It's all just bundled all together. But I'll talk about where that would go in the process if you were looking for more specifically geographic data. And then here's the file I just showed on the screen, the text file. It's using a really weird, not a comma separated. It's this vertical bar separated. So you might have to play around with it a little bit if you wanted to pull this in as a data set, but not too bad. R has packages for that. The next thing I always do is when I'm running something and I don't want the code to show, I'll always start with the first chunk and include false so that it hides all of the code. And then I'll set the knitter options because I'm using Markdown so that I don't get warnings, I don't get echoes, I don't get errors or messages. R will let you know if it's not working. You'll get errors probably in this area here, or you'll get the ugly red line nobody likes. But I don't need the output including errors. Can hide those. Thank you very much. And then the 2 packages I'm going to be using for this script are the tidyverse, which includes things like dplyr and stringer, which I use a lot, both of which I'm going to be using in here, but it's nice to be able to just unpack the tidyverse package that includes all of the posit packages that I like to use regularly. I like when you have a package of packages. It saves a lot of time and energy. One thing you'll notice though is that certain functions in the tidyverse are sometimes overwritten by other packages. So for example, the select function in tidyverse is going to be arguing with the Census API select function in this program. So the Census API version of select is going to trump the tidyverse version of select. So anytime I want to use select from dplyr, I have to indicate that it's the dplyr package I want to use the select function from. So just something to pay attention to if you get funny errors when you're using the tidyverse packages and other packages that may have the similar functions. If you get a funny error, it's probably not you. It's probably thinking you mean the other version of select, for example. So I'll show you what that looks like in the program. And then once we unpack this stuff, so I'll just run the code here. Set my knit options and unpack my packages. The next step is your Census API key. You can go to api.census.gov/data/key_signup to get your Census API key. The program will not work without your API key. I use it so much that I actually incorporated it into my R profile environment. So I can just use the sys.getEnv function, and I named it my Census API key. And that way I don't have to have the actual key in my code. So y'all can copy this and look at it without using don't use my API. Get your own. But in this case, I got so fed up with having it out in public for everyone to see that I figured out how to hide it. So just in case you're wondering, there are global variables you could set forever and ever without having to redefine them or redeclare them every time you're using R. Just a little fun fact. So now I'm going to tell it what my API key is so that I can use this in my program. And then the first function I'm going to use from the Census API package is called list census APIs here. And hold on just a moment. Let me get some. I want to know why my thing won't full screen. This is funny. I can't see the chat, by the way, because I'm sharing my screen. So if Wendy or Jessica or whoever can let me know if there's any questions, I would be very grateful. Anyway, so the list census APIs will list all of the census APIs available from the Census API. I turn it into a tibble because I prefer the format of a tibble. So let me just run this and you can see what our options are. It is an API call, so it takes a little bit of time. And sometimes I'll get sort of an error, which means that there's something wrong on the census end. Sometimes when new data is being published and the API is being updated, it's going to take a bit of time. I've had that happen before, maybe once, but not really an issue to worry about. Anyway, so here is the complete set of all of the APIs available through the Census API. There are 1,603 of them. And we've got what it's called to humans, and then that's the title, and then what it's called to the API, that's the name. And then the vintage is, you know, when it started. And then type is usually either microdata or aggregate. Aggregates are just rolled up, so it's more like macro data. For some of these are temporal, so they're like capturing a moment in time, kind of a data set, as opposed to a time series that's collected at different time steps over time. And then the URL is if you want to use a different method of pulling the data from the API, this is the URL to access that specific API data set. And then if you want to know anything about dates of modification, so pretty much the last time the data was updated, so last time essentially it was published. And then description in English for humans, that's the human part, to tell you what it is about. And then email address if you need to contact somebody to have any questions or need some help figuring out what you're doing. Although my best recommendation is to Google it. but you know, if all else fails, there's an email address for you. So that's the big, huge data set of all of the indicators that you can access through the API. And then we're going to play around with QSS, Quarterly Services Survey. So first I'm going to use the next function I'm going to use from this package is called list census metadata. So this is going to tell me what kind of variables are available for my particular indicator I'm interested in. In this case, I'm going to look for the quarterly services survey, and I'm going to see what kind of variables are there. So let me run that. And then here you can see we've got some clauses for an in, a time value, a data type code, time slot ID, an indicator variable for seasonality, seasonal adjustment, pardon me. Program code, category code, which is like the NAICS code is used a lot. SIC RCD codes are used a lot. Depending on the indicator, it uses a different code to identify the specific industry that you're looking at. Geo level code would be having to do with location. We were talking about FIPS codes earlier. Time slot date is a character version of the time. And then we've got time slot name, another character version of time. Cell value, this is where the meat is. This is what the actual numbers we're looking for. And then error data, if you want to know not just the value that you're looking for or the set of values for a time series you're looking for, but also error data, because these are all estimates, then you can also get the error data as well. So those are all the variables. And then in order for me to pull the data, I need to know which variables are required because I have to grab them when I pull the data. So this section right here is the actual API call. But before we get there, I need to know which variables I need to ask for because the Census API package is not sophisticated enough to just know what based on which time series. So I want to look for QSS. Then since I want to look for QSS, I need these variables as opposed to those variables for a different indicator, maybe like wholesale or manufacturing or something like that, where there's different variables I need to grab. So the step of getting the census metadata is to grab those variables you need, or else the call is not going to work. So that's what I've got here. And this is just the ones that are called required variables. And that's a set of 10 variables that I need to include in my call to get the call to come back. Otherwise, the funny errors pop up. So that's my QSS REQD required. And then here is the actual API call. I'm going to talk about it before I run it. So the function's called get census. The Census API package uses Camel script. Forget if that's the right name. I know it's Camel something, where the first letter of the first word is lowercase, but the first letter of any subsequent word is uppercase as a formatting, so you don't have to keep doing underscores. Nobody likes an underscore. so a little fun thing there. So the first thing I have to include is the name, and that's the name of the series I'm looking for. So if we go back up here, that is this column here called name. So this is essentially what I'm grabbing and putting in there. I could go through and make like a for loop and just say, give me all of the ones. You make a million API calls and get a ton of data. Or you can filter this to just include the list that you care about and use the piping function to only grab those. But because I'm only looking at this particular indicator, I figured I'll just type it out. I don't like to hard code, but sometimes it's just easier. And then my API key that I already declared at the beginning, I need to include the key. The time portion is kind of an interesting one. This is the part of this function that this package, I think the author did put some work into formatting and making it easy for the user, because what it's going to look like is it's going to look like from 2017 to 2023 in the API call, like a not a time variable or a time value or a date time value, but it's just a character string, which was not what I expected. I figured that would be more complicated, but in fact, in this case, it's less complicated. So this is really what it looks like.
Hey, Nora.
Yes.
So essentially what it's doing there is it's sort of pasting it together and creating a string. So
Yes.
it interprets 2017 and 2023 as strings. So the
Part of
whole
the
thing-
string. Yes.
Yeah.
So this is using the strc underscore C function, which comes from the stringer package. And the C is for concatenate. So it really just glues each comma separated piece together into one long string, which comes in really handy when I'm trying to rename stuff or I'm trying to combine stuff. I'll actually be using the same function later on a little bit down the this program. I use the strc like all the time. It's very comes in very handy, and it's very feels a lot like the concatenate function in Excel or just any sort of basic concatenation. So I can list as many items as I want to here, and it'll just glue them all together. I think glue is also an older R function that does essentially the same thing. But since I've got my tidyverse package, I'm just going to use the function in the tidyverse. So that's how we define time, the time period. You can also be more specific if you want to specify a month or a quarter or something like that. I don't really need to be all that specific. And to me, what I like to do when I'm doing API calls in general is just grab as much that's simple and easy. Because the more specific you become with an API call, like the longer it takes, because then the API has to do filtering and specifying. Whereas if I just scoop a bunch of data and dump it in a bucket and I can clean it up in R, then the API call, it might be a lot of data, but it's not going to take as much time to go through, and then have to worry about weird errors and specifying certain codes and stuff like that. So I tend to just do that on my end and just scoop the data out of the API. The next step is region, which even though my QSS data is nationwide, I don't need to specify regional codes or anything. I still need to say region equals stuff. And then it's a US, and then the colon, and then the asterisk as a wildcard to mean all of the things. If you wanted to get a state by state, then you would say state colon star to get all of the states, which also, by the way, includes the territories as well. So the FIPS code list I was showing earlier also has information about FIPS codes for like Puerto Rico and the American Samoa, for example, other US territories that have not become states. But I do have to put the region variable in there in the API call or it won't work. And then I have to list the variables to grab. And remember, we had to get that list by making sure we grabbed all the required variables. If I miss one, I get an error. It's very picky. So let me show you what the data looks like when we grab it. So here it is talking to the API. I'm like, hey API, hey Sense API, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing all right today. It's a lovely Tuesday. Here's the output. There are 59,500 rows and 12 columns. Clearly not going to need all of that, but as I mentioned before, I like to big scoop and dump it in, and then I can filter it and arrange it and wrangle it to my heart's content. So we've got data type codes. So that's going to tell me what kind of data is available in the sense of what's being counted. And then time slot ID. These are all zeros. Don't really need that variable, but the API makes me use it and call it, even though I'm not going to use it and just going to skip right over it. The third column is seasonally adjusted, so indicates whether the time series I'm looking at is seasonally adjusted. The program code is QSS for the quarterly services survey, so that's from the name aspect. The category code for QSS, we use NAICS codes, and then an indicator value letter indicating whether it's taxable or exempt or or a combination of both. So A for all, meaning both taxable and exempt, and then E for exempt, and then T for taxable, if that kind of a specification matters to you. And then, whoops, I scrolled up. And that's the NAICS code for category code. I should also indicate a disclaimer. QSS is using NAICS codes from 2012, which is the oldest available. We are in the process of updating our NAICS codes to a more contemporary standard. But as you are probably well aware, updates take a long time around here. So being very patient with it all. But yeah, these are based on the 2012 NAICS standards. Then the geo level code. So for example, if we wanted to go state by state, this is where it would list the codes for each state. Specifically, time slot date, despite the fact that this looks like a date time variable, it's a character variable. In some cases that might be useful. It is not useful to me. This is year, quarter. I don't know what the 01 is, but this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, not 12. These are not months, these are quarters. Because that confuses people, they've got a time slot name. So quarter 1 of 2023, quarter 2 of 2023, and so forth. Then the cell value is the actual measurement. That's the part we really care about. And then whether it's error data or not. And then the time indicator that's got the year, and then a hyphen, and then the quarter. And then the US, this is the actual code. So for example, if we were looking at data that was state by state, then geo level code would say state instead of US. And then the US, this would be a variable called state, and these would be the codes for each state that was of interest in the API call. So a lot of data is kind of messy. It's got stuff I don't care about. It's got more than I would ever need. So now we can start wrangling and filtering the data. The first thing that I want to know is what kind of thing do I want to be counting? So the next thing I did was I made a list of all the data types. So that's this first column here. So I'm taking my data set. I'm selecting just the data type code and just the distinct values, which is like the unique function in Excel, just to get a list of what's in this column as unique values. This is what I was talking about earlier when I was saying how the select function exists in the tidyverse, but it also exists in the Census API and is very different. So I have to indicate which package's version of select I need to use. And to do that, you list the name of the package and then 2 colons, and then you go ahead and write the function name. So it's just a little prefix on the name of the function. So let me show you this list of what's available. So I've got 10 variables. So we've got EQRev, PQEXP, EPQEXP, PQRev, EPQRev, QXP, EQXP, QRev, eGov, HHD, 36 rows, a whole bunch more. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll give you a little bit of insight here. These E underscores mean the error values. Sometimes they're CVs, sometimes they're standard errors. Depends on what's being measured. QRev is quarterly revenue. QEXP is quarterly expenses. We collect revenue for all of the NAICS codes that we collect data for. We do not collect expenses for all of them. We collect expenses for a subset. So not every NAICS code has expenses, but every NAICS code has revenue of the NAICS codes that we publish. And then PQRev means for the preliminary or prior quarter, I believe. So we are, the most recent quarter we've published for is the 4th quarter of 2023. So the most recent data that we'll be able to grab is the 4th quarter of 2023. And then once, when we publish for the 1st quarter of 2024, for example, which is coming up pretty soon, for our advanced release, then the data will update the same day that it is published. So the brand new data point for the new quarter will be available at the same time as what we publish, and the published dates are available on the census.gov website. So that's what rev and exp means, and that's what the E_ is for error and the P is for prior. And then we've got things like gov and HHD, which has to do with, I think this is like hospital something, but business, government, revenue or something. Not really sure exactly because I don't work in industries where these are the specific data we collect, but relevant in a lot of cases. And their definitions can be found on their respective indicator websites. So QSS website for us will explain what all of these mean. Not part of the API developers part of the census.gov website. But
Hey, Nora?
Yes.
So is this a list of the data values, I guess, that you downloaded?
This is the QSS API is the data that I got. This is a list of what is available so I can identify what I care about. What I want to look at is quarterly revenue, QRev. So I'm only going to look at this particular variable of what's being counted, as opposed to looking at like error data or expenses data or whatever. Each of these indicators has a list of what you're pulling from the API. And that's this data types variable. And we're going to use that because I wanted to identify which of these do I care about. Oh, there it is. It's called QRev and it's all caps. And now I can filter just the ones I want. So in this chunk, this is actually the end of my program. It's super short. We're going to wrangle the data in and put it in a format where we can actually use it to do things like make graphs, run analysis, lots of fun things, because R likes vectors, and is very strict about vectors, and it will love your vector if you give it a vector that it can love. It wants a vector with a name that doesn't start with a number, and then goes down a column of data, just like the old vectors I remember learning about in college. And then because they're time series, we want them in order from oldest to newest. So that's the format I'm looking for. I want to get it to the point where I have each variable, like each NAICS code, with this column of data, oldest to newest, and they're all kind of lined up in a matrix, boom, 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 down the line. So I can grab any two columns, do some analysis. Maybe I can find some correlation or a CCF, cross correlation factor with lags and all kinds of fun stuff. Or maybe I can graph it, or, whatever you want to play with, whatever you want to do with the data. Getting it into that format is the goal of this program. So we're going to filter just the data that is revenue data. And then we're going to eliminate all these extra variables that we don't need. Let me get my data set back. Okay. So we're only going to grab the ones that say QRev without the E in front or the P in front. We're only going to grab the columns we care about, which is time, category code, cell value, and whether it's seasonally adjusted. So here's my seasonally adjusted one. Don't need that. Need category code because that tells me which industry. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Cell value, I need that. Don't need that. This is the time slot name that I like to use. Or wait, which one did I use? Time. This is the one. So this is the time I like to use. So I don't need this one. It's just redundant. There's my cell value. I don't need error data because QRev isn't error, it's nominal data. So I don't need to worry about the error data column. They're all just going to be a massive column of no's because it's not error data. And I don't need this US, it's just a column of ones. So I'm going to select just those columns that matter to me. Time, NAICS code, actual data, and then whether it's seasonally adjusted, the indicator variable. And then I'm going to sort it by oldest to newest, and then by the category code. So we listed in opposite order. So time is going to be the one that rules all, and then category code. So I can kind of clean up this data set and just grab the data I care about. So let's see what that looks like. So here we can see there's my time starting with the first quarter of 2017. And that's simply because that's the year that I grabbed data to start with. The reason I chose that for QSS is that the sample we're currently working with started in 2017. So that's the beginning of the sample. And just for consistency, I like to stay within the sample instead of trying to bridge the gap between two different samples, which is doable. And there's a lot of people, very smart people that work at the Census Bureau that spend a lot of time figuring out how to bridge the gap. But I know it's a lot of work that I don't want to do. So I will leave that to them. They are better equipped at that. And then the category code is NAICS. This line of zeros is just the total. So the selected services total that we publish. And then this is the value. I believe we publish in thousands. So there should be 3 extra zeros on the end of here, in case you're wondering about magnitude of these values. But this is a dollar amount, and then whether it's seasonally adjusted or not. This data set is in what's called long form. But the next step in order to turn it into what my goal is, which is to make this matrix of vectors of data, I need the names of the variables, which is going to come from the category code column. But remember, I said R doesn't like it when you start a variable with anything but a letter. It doesn't like starting a variable with numbers. So to make it happy, I'm going to combine the seasonally adjusted indicator with the category code as its own new column of data for this data set to make that into the names that are going to happen when we pivot the data set. So that's what we've done here. And now we've got whether it's seasonal and then what it is. So now, and it starts with a letter now. So R will be happy with me. So I've got my quarter, category and seasonality, and then the actual value of the data. Now the next step is to pivot the data set so that it's in wide form versus long form. This is in long form because the category is a column. And instead of each category being its own vector, you can see it's in long form as well because we've got thousands of rows and only 3 columns, which usually indicates that there's some kind of, this is in long form. Another reason that we can see it's in long form is that I've got descriptor columns and then the actual data in its own 1 column only. So to put it in the format I need to do stuff like analysis or graphing, like using ggplot or something, I need to make it into wide form. So I'm using the function called pivot wider. And to pivot wider, you need at minimum to tell it 2 things. I need to tell it where the names are going to come from. That's the column names or the variable names, the column headers. And I need to tell it where the actual data values are, the values from. So here's going to be the names of my columns, and here's the data that's going to go in my columns. And then the time column is going to get shifted up so that it doesn't repeat any time steps. So I won't see 2 lines of 2017. It'll just Q1, it'll just say 2017 Q1 once. And so it'll go from this long skinny data set to more of a short wide data set. And I'll show you what that looks like. This is probably pivoting columns is really fun because it feels like magic. And so here we go. So now I've got my time steps in order uniquely. There are 28 rows because from 2017 to the most recent quarter we published, which was 2023 Q4, that is 7 years of data, 4 times a year, makes 28 rows of data. And then for my not seasonally adjusted services total, this is the revenue that was estimated. And then for the seasonally adjusted revenue, and then for 22 NAICS code 2211, I don't remember what that is. I can go over to one of the ones that I know because I work with the data. So for example, 5311 is real estate. So not seasonally adjusted, gives me these numbers for revenue. Seasonally adjusted is these numbers. Remember the T is for taxable revenue or companies that are taxable. So not nonprofits, for example. That we separate them in industries where it matters or where there's a large proportion of exempt businesses, for example, like a nonprofit in the healthcare sector would be an example of that, or in the education sector. So now I've got my columns and columns and columns of data that I can play with. And just to give you an idea, the typeface is really tiny when I do this, but we've got our time slots. So here's the most recent quarter at the bottom. And then we can like graph these things, we can analyze them, but they're in that format of having these columns of data kind of next to each other, organized from oldest to newest. And then it's not hard to pull two columns. In some cases, we have to format them as time series before we can actually run any actual time series analysis on them. But that's not too difficult when they're already in this kind of a format. To do with as you please. So that's what I've done here. It's not a very long program, doesn't include very much work to do. It's more of about like the knowing what to ask the API for and how to ask it, and remembering to include all of the required variables in the variables parameter in the function, the get census function, and entering it all. And keep in mind that if you try to run an API and you get a funny error, it's probably something omitted or included in using the wrong format or something like that. Or you're being specific with a region when the data itself is not specific for a region. So it's telling you, I can't give you that kind of information. Another downside of the Census API package I found is that the error messages are not very informative. Error messages are rarely actually informative. They just tell you something's wrong. It's like dealing with an infant. It is crying, something is wrong. What is wrong? I don't know. But I have a list of things it could possibly be. So I will go through this list and identify which of the things could be wrong at this point in time. I have a niece who is 2, so we play that game.
I had to come off camera and laugh, chuckle, because that's a really good analogy.
I just want the baby to stop crying, please. So yeah, that's pretty much all I prepared for this today. I can forward the script to Wendy if you want to put it somewhere where people can access it. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That was one of the questions in the Q&A, was if you would share your code. And yeah, if you send me the script, then I'll get the list of attendees, registered attendees from
Great.
Donna, and I'll email it to the attendees. Yeah, so I definitely appreciate that. I think I'm going to have to try to use the API just to, I don't know, see if I can do any damage.
All right.
And there is another question. So Jim said, skimming census on the census developers page, I see several APIs and dates. Can you pinpoint the API and its schema documentation, please? Maybe Jessica could help us with that.
So here, the API is census developers created the API and managed the API. What I'm talking about is the Census API package, which is one way to grab the data from the API. So I'm trying to find the question on the I found the chat.
Yeah, this was in the actual Q&A, the
Oh.
Q&A link. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question for me again, please?
Yeah, sure. So skimming the developers page, I see several APIs and dates. Can you pinpoint the API and its schema documentation?
I don't know if the schema documentation is available. There's the user guide, which goes into pretty specific information as far as how to format an API call, but it doesn't go through like step by step how to use R to do it. Or there is a tutorial, but it's not in the user manual. So I don't think that the schema is going to be available because that's like the how it was built. So I don't really know how to answer that question, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, that's okay. There's so Jessica's been putting some things in the chat. Thank you. And also so I'm not part of I haven't taken advantage of this, but because I don't really I haven't had to use the API, but anyway, I think there's a Slack channel, right, Jessica, that people can sign up for and ask questions. And I don't know if our census API folks are on the webinar, but there's people to email and ask. And I guess Jim just asked about that, who built it. I know, Jessica, do you want to say anything more about that? You might be the more of
I
an
am
expert than I am, for
the
sure.
Census API expert. I have talked with the Census API group enough to know, though, that it's not like, I think, Jim, I think I kind of have a sense of what you're looking for, because I was actually going to ask the same question of Nora. And that is, is there a way? So this was the first time I've gotten to see you do this a few times, and this was the first time I was like, okay, I'm going to code along, I'm going to get this, and I got the data. It all looked exactly as you showed it. It all worked perfectly. So I wanted to test, like, okay, could I follow this process and actually get the CPS data? I tried to get the CPS school supplement. I tried to get one other thing, and it failed both times. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not this straightforward. We can just use the same logic and get the data similarly across programs. And that kind of lends itself to the next thing I learned. I learned from the Census API people that because it's just such a huge volume of data, it's coming from so many different places. I think it's easy to lose perspective of how huge the Census Bureau is. Like, we have over 300 programs, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. So everyone gives their data to the API folks in a completely different format. So it makes it very difficult for them to then standardize variable names. Like, and they had great examples. They're like, some people give us date abbreviation, some people give us FIPS code. Like, for them to go through each data set and try to standardize it is not in the cards right now. I think they would like that, but it makes it harder to just like take this logic and say, okay, I want to now get all the other data there is out there using the same wonderful program.
Yeah, so let me just segue then into the user guide. So this is the user guide I've been referencing, and it's pretty long, pretty in-depth. But you were looking for the CP, say it again. What was the data you were looking up? Jessica, sorry, you're muted.
Supplement. All right, no, I'm sorry. I was looking for the CPS. I think it's their October school enrollment supplement.
That's the current population survey?
Current population survey, yes. And I put the developer's guide in the chat too. Sorry, go ahead, Nora.
So, I mean, it does get into some pretty good detail about what's going on. But this, for example, was like how I grabbed the variables to identify which are required variables from R. So this is a similar output without using R, just the reference from the user guide to identify like what do I need to make sure I request when I run that API, so to avoid getting errors. That was the big wall that I hit when I was first teaching myself how to use the Census API package, was like, I don't care about these variables. Why do I have to use them? I just won't. And then it won't give me any data. That's why you have to go through the steps of figuring out which variables are required, so you make sure you include all of them, which is kind of silly. But for example, here, because it's required, you have to include the date, even if that's not something you care about. I thought there was one example. But for the very reason you mentioned, that we've got like 1,600 different indicators or surveys available on the API, and they're all from different divisions or different groups in the Census Bureau, which is massive. So if we were to wait for some sort of standardized methods for variable names, we would never have published an API. We'd still be waiting, is what I'm saying. So it's like a plus minus. I'd rather have it and have to sift through it and get it and use it than have to like wait, because I'm very impatient. But I'm like nerd impatient, right? The kind of impatient where I'm gonna spend days of my life figuring out how to do it the fast way. Right.
And you know, someone gave me some very good perspective once, and that was Kyle Walker, our Tidy Census developer. And I said something about how it was difficult, it was a little bit of a mess to figure out. And he said, "You have no idea how valuable that census API is." It was like, so it was like a glass half full, half empty. And I think if you're
Yes.
willing to put some time into it, it is like this gold mine of data.
Yes. And it gives me a little bit more appreciation for the Tidy Census package, because at first I was like, what about my indicator? How come my indicator's not in it? But then I realized like he wanted to start with what most people would be using. What's the data that most people care about, that data users are actually going to seek out and use the API for? And then that's where he started, and those come from similar departments. So their formatting is relatively similar. They're naming variables similarly. So designing a package to pull that API is going to be a lot more streamlined. Whereas the census API package is great because it's everything. But because all of the variables are differently named, you kind of have to sift through and figure out what exactly, I know what I'm looking for. How do I tell the API what I'm looking for? Because we're not on the same, just because one indicator might use one name and a different indicator might use a different standardized name. Like QSS uses NAICS codes from 2017 for some reason. Other indicators use NAICS codes from 2012, but other indicators are using NAICS codes from 2017, and some indicators use a different international industry specification code system thing that I don't know how it works. This is completely different, but serves the same purpose. And so because they're all so disparate, I completely understand why he chose what he did to start with, because yeah, it's a lot. There's so much data available that it's like an impossible task to try to standardize all of it and make it that much easier. But you play with it a little bit, you start to figure out what exactly they're looking for. There are things that are always the same, like in my API call here, the name is always going to be this name that shows up here, whatever that is. It's always going to be that as a character string. And then the time format is always going to be the same kind of time format as a character string. Region gets a little funny. I have to know if my data is published at the state level or not. If it's not, then I have to use this US:**. If it is, then I have to know how to specify the state that I'm pulling data for, or the states. But you can use the in piping if you have a list, which is nice. And then I have to know which variables I need to ask for. Although I did kind of automate the process by being like, well, you tell me which variables do I need to ask for? And then just stick them right in there. Boom, done. So there are some standards in the sense of like, it's always going to make me tell it these things, but I can also be more specific if I want to. And then it's just a matter of how. I believe the regions follow the FIPS codes, and then the other geographic codes, like for congressional districts, are available where, yeah. So if you go here, there's a bunch of other code lists that it'll that'll talk about. And then in that case, like county codes. So instead of it saying US:, for states, it would be state:, for like a county, it would be county:, that kind of thing. And then you can list the codes or like a set, that kind of thing. So kind of annoying, not the worst. But there is a lot that I forget who wrote this. There is an R reference for it, but there's a lot of work that went into this to try to standardize it more, but it's, the mountain to climb. That's one Everest to climb to try to standardize really anything in the Census Bureau.
So, Nora,
So
in your opinion, if you were a complete beginner, would it be better to start with Tidy Census or just dive into Census API, get your hands dirty, figure it out? Like, which is the better approach, would you think, if we're trying to help new people?
I think it depends on what people are looking for. The good news, bad news, like the plus minus on this is that with Tidy Census, you get used to Tidy Census, but it's a subset of what's available. But if all I care about is what I can get from Tidy Census anyway, then it's very helpful because it does streamline a lot of the work that I have to do, kind of legwork I got to do to figure out how to get this API call to work. So on the one hand, I would recommend that if the people are looking for like population data, that's the Tidy Census is the place to go for that. But if your goal is to like get economic indicator data, the trepidation I would have is that like people would get used to how Tidy Census works with the API calls and then get stuck in Census API because it's not behaving the same way and it's not using the same names of things or logic. So I would say if what you want is economic indicator data, then just, put on scuba gear and dive into the Census API. If what you want is to play around with population data that's available through Tidy Census and that's what you care about anyway, then go for it. I don't see, why make the task more difficult for yourself? Be lazy. That's what genius is, as far as I'm concerned. So really the point is like, what's my goal? Can I achieve this with the Tidy Census? If so, awesome. If not, then, got to roll my sleeves up and try to figure out how to make this Census API business work. But it's like, it's something to get used to, but once I got used to it, it was like, oh, okay, I know how to grab this data now. And I've been able, like, I've worked on projects where I've pulled data for a multitude of different, like from ACS, but see, I haven't pulled anything from the population survey. So maybe that's why I don't know exactly how to specify those variables, but like I've grabbed data from, it's all the time series data is down here. It starts with time series. Da, 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 da. I'm never going to get there. There's too many rows. But there's a few that start with the phrase time series. Let me just not piss myself off. Code on the fly, filter.
You're being very daring. Well, I have to say while you're typing that I've tried to get data using data.census.gov or whatever it's called. And I get really frustrated with it. It's supposedly like an easy way to get things, by point and click and that kind of stuff. But it's very non-intuitive to me. And this seems, even though this can be complicated, this seems more straightforward, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, the downside with using the tool on the website is that you can only get one time series at a time. Whereas with this one, I pulled everything that QSS publishes. So not too shabby. But yeah, the tool is fun, but it's also sort of older and there's some hubbub in the census about updating that and having a different interface used because it is kind of still clunky. Why did that not work? Pattern is missing. Boo.
Well, I think you answered all of the Q&A questions. I'm just going through the chat.
Anybody in the chat figured out what I did wrong with my filter function? Oh, it's fine. Nobody has to answer that. I'm just only half asking. Maybe I can do title.
No, because I've never actually used the filter function. I didn't even know there was one.
It's in the dplyr. Dplyr is the package in the Tidyverse I use by far the most. That's where the pivot comes from. Pivot longer, pivot wider, and a lot of it feels, for those of you who have used SQL or SQL, which we're not supposed to call SQL because there's a stupid copyright. Anyway, SQL programming where you have like from, select, where, group by, these kinds of functions for any listeners that are used to using SQL. The dplyr package feels a lot like SQL because I do select, from, you don't have to say from, that's where you start with the from. And
Yeah,
then you have
I'm getting that sense. Yeah, I was scrolling through the chat and I agree with Stas about the tidyverse. I'm not a tidy person. As you can see, if my background wasn't dark, you could see, but anyway. And I'm not tidy in R either. Let's see. Oh, and I did put,
Oh, detect. Thank you. Is that Nabil? Thank you.
oh, somebody put the
I used the wrong
answer in
STR.
there. Okay, and Jessica, and I did put the two packages that I was thinking of with you know, dealing with FIPS codes and conversions with that stuff. One is I think it's CDL tools, and then the other one is US data, whatever. Anyway, I put it in there. Yeah, US data.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim put some great
Damn it.
things in there. Tiplify. I've never heard of that one before. Tiplify package.
Oh, I've heard of the Tipify. I haven't used it. Oh,
Great.
really? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Gwen put something in there about camel case. I never knew that had a
Camel
name
case.
for it, a label. See, I've learned
I don't know what the camels have to do with it, but there you go.
maybe the capital letter is like their hump or something, but
Honestly, I can't even get a comma right, Nora.
yeah, Gwen, camels have humps. Yeah, and I
There we
have to
go.
say too that thank you for the pro tip on setting up your
Thank you.
environment. It took me the longest time I didn't even know we could do that until I started listening to Jessica's our user group meetings, because one of the things that I do, well, I used to do until I moved things around, was I would think I was in my command window and I'd be typing something, but I was really in my script window. And so I'd be like undoing my script because I thought I was, you know, at the command window. Anyway,
Yeah.
so.
I mean, the only thing that annoys me is I can't completely make them go away. So like this one I never use. So I put all of the categories I don't care about down here. And then I just minimize it every time I open Artist. I don't want you, go away, but you can't like remove a panel. You're given 4 and you have to take 4. Yeah,
Yeah, I
top
didn't know you
left,
could
top right.
minimize it. I'll have to try that next.
So
Okay.
yeah, so
Cool.
there's the minimize is the little flat guy, and then maximize is the big guy. And then you can also kind of play around with the position of the middle divider.
Yeah, cool.
Snake case, that's what it's called when you have underscores. Nobody likes an underscore.
Okay.
And the only reason nobody likes underscore is that you have to like shift your pinky ring finger up to by the 0, and it's just out of the way.
Well, it's
But
more
shift is capital.
keystrokes.
It is because I have to do shift and I have to find out where my underscore button is, and nobody likes that. I mean,
no.
It used to be the case that we would use a decimal, a period. In a lot of older R, you might notice this, a lot of older R parameters and functions will have a decimal separating words. And then they stopped doing that because they started using, it became a little bit confusing because it was also a way to indicate a subtype in a summary output.
Yeah.
And so it couldn't use the same structure with two different things, especially when you're using them in tandem. So that's why they standardized it to use the underscore instead of the period. So for some older functions that I've been using forever, they've started to like depreciate the use of the decimal point to separate words and instead use the underscore. And then now camel case is becoming the new big thing, which I love because I don't have to find the decimal point. I don't have to find the stupid underscore. I just shift capital letters are easy. I can handle that. Not a problem. But it is
That-
because
that-
programmers
that
are
makes-
lazy, which is fine.
It makes more intuitive sense. Okay, well, thank you so much, Nora. I think we've answered all the questions, although we have at least one person who likes the snake case. So that's good. You know, there's options for everybody.
All right. I'm going to just put my email in the chat in case anybody has any further questions. I'm happy to answer
That
any
would
questions you might
be
have.
fabulous. And yes, Nabil, I will let me put my email in the chat too. And just in case if you don't get it like in the next week, you know, get Nora's scripts, then you could email me. So all right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Nora. This was wonderful. Yeah, great talk. It's always good to hear from you. And I learned a lot. So I don't know about everybody else, but I learned a lot, and I might start seeing if I can talk to the API. Hopefully I don't break it.
No, don't worry. You can't break it from here. You gotta
Cool.
be on the API team to cause some real damage.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thanks, Jessica, for being here too and moderating the webinar.
A
All
huge
right.
thank you to Nora. She did all the cool stuff.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks for
very,
having
very
me.
cool.
I love talking about all of this R stuff, so I'm glad to be here to do
Well,
more.
We're happy to have you. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Goodbye.
All right. Bye.